So my study is on the impact of political ideology on one's perception of bias in the American mainstream media. So this all started from one event, and it was the event of January 6, 2021, and how the different news companies reported on this event. And so different news companies that were associated, or that have been associated with different political ideologies, reported on it with completely different pieces of information. And this is concerning because Americans are getting different pieces of information that are labeled as accurate. And so because news organizations are catering to certain political, to a certain political audience, are we able to take in and interpret accurate reporting if it's not sugar-coated in language that aligns with our own political beliefs? So according to Gallup, Americans' trust in the media is at its lowest since 2016, and this is likely due to the severe polarization that's been occurring within the American media, and it's further divided Americans with opposing political beliefs. So this could lead to Americans disbelieving in news sources, or in news that they hear, just because it's news coming from a source that doesn't seem reputable to them and their own political ideologies. So just a few important terms. The first is oppositional media hostility, and it's where a consumer of a given news article or source of some kind believes that it is unnecessarily biased against their own political viewpoints, and it causes them to show hostility towards that news source. And selective exposure, which is where people will only consume news that's from sources that affirm and bolster their own political beliefs rather than challenging or reporting things objectively. So on to some important sources that helped me with this project. So the first is called The Role of Political Identity in Media Selection on Perceptions of Hostile Media Bias During the 2012 Presidential Campaign. And this is by Mei Chen Lin, Paul M. Paridakis, and Gary Hansen. And so basically what they did was they subjected their participants to several different sources, TV sources, social networking sites, radio channels, and video sharing platforms. And they exposed them to information and reporting on the 2012 election and different campaigns. And basically, people who felt that their political party was portrayed as performing inferior to the other one, even if it was just objectively how they did, viewed the media as the coverage as biased, and they showed oppositional media hostility towards those sources that presented them as their own political party as not doing as well. The next source is called Evaluating the News, Misperceptions of Objectivity and Credibility by Dimitri Kelly. And basically, he gave subjects a balanced, unbiased source from a site that they were not aware of. And people thought it was biased because it did not phrase things precisely in the way that they were used to, and like in the media that they would normally consume that aligns with their own political beliefs. And he found that people are inclined to sort themselves into partisan news, even if given the option of receiving objective information. That shows that people are more prone to organizing with other people that share their own beliefs in places that they're comfortable with. And he found that the media has expanded and moved away from objectively reporting on news stories to gain viewership of certain groups of their target audiences. My next study is called Inequality and Bias in the Demand for and Supply of News by Ann L. Owen and Andrew Way. And so they just analyzed a bunch of data, and they found that political affiliations can have an impact on perceived bias in the mass media. And they actually found that people with conservative political ideologies, they tend to seek a more individualistic news sources. And so they found that people with conservative ideologies tend to exhibit more confirmation bias and selective exposure. The next study is called Polarized Political Communication, Oppositional Media Hostility, and Selective Exposure by Kevin Arsenault, Barton Johnson, and Chad Murphy. And so they basically looked into how partisan news outlets affect oppositional media hostility. And so they gave their participants partisan articles to read. And the subjects who did not have articles that aligned with their political beliefs, they showed severe oppositional media hostility. And they found that this is not necessarily seen as much in the mainstream media or in the public because of selective exposure. And so that's why oppositional media hostility, though it is a problem, it's not as big of a problem as it could be. Then my last source is called Congenial Public Controversy, Contrary Press and Biased Estimates of the Climate of Opinion by Albert Gunther, Cindy Christian, Janice Liebhardt, and Stella Chia. And so basically this focused around the public opinion about the use of primates in lab research. And it looked into hostile media perception and the persuasive press inference and projection bias. And so they found that people with strong political opinions on certain issues, they tend to think that the media is more biased than people with a more neutral stance. So people on the extreme ends tend to believe that there's more bias than those who are, not on the extreme ends. And that the opinions of leaders in our society can have a major impact on people's belief as well. So this goes into my methodology. So I chose a case study. I was initially leaning towards correlational research, but my testing did not result in data that was narrow enough to fit a strong correlation, or a strict correlation, because I looked into a wide range of factors and variables, and correlation research is a lot narrower than what I was kind of looking at, because I was looking at it from a general viewpoint. And so I was looking into why a certain trend exists, and if political ideology does have an effect on someone's ability to interpret information and their openness to receiving information. And so basically I conducted this through a survey. So the first thing I did was I started with some just baseline information. Do you believe that there's bias in the mainstream media? I asked, do you think that bias is a threat? Things like that, just kind of gauging before I provided them with sources, just kind of to see where they're at. And then I provided them with two separate sources, one from a more liberal aligned source and one from a more conservatively aligned source from CNN and Newsmax respectively. And I tried to find something that was reporting on very similar things from January 6th and how President Trump responded to, or former President Trump responded to the actions of that day. And then I asked them kind of their perception. I asked them whether they thought the articles presented him fairly or unfairly. I asked them to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 on their perceptions of the accuracy of the source, and then just to kind of gauge their response to the source. And then I went into some demographic information, so like what is their political affiliations? Are they political? I asked them how politically active they were, things like that, how engaged they were in the media, and to see if they're keeping up with the news. So some of my overall results. So basically 96.7% of people believe that bias exists within the media. 70.3% of people believe that the bias favors a particular side, and 79.9% of people believe that bias is a threat to our society. So this is kind of like just the overall things before I dive into the responses to the articles. These are some of those general, like, kind of pre-questions, I guess. So there is overall a great perception of bias in the media. And so, on the whole, conservatives believe that there is more bias present than liberals. So they believe that 43.9% of people believe that, or the participants believe that the bias favored liberals, and 34.7% believe that the bias favored conservatives. And then, so respondents asked. So this is an example of when I asked the respondents to rate the veracity of the information that was being presented to them from the articles on a scale of 1 to 5. So 1 is being least accurate, and 5 being, or 1 being not accurate at all, and 5 being like 100% accurate. And both Newsmax and CNN showed relatively almost identical trends in their spread of how people believed how true the information they were presenting was. And then another interesting kind of thing is a lot of the people that I surveyed, they did not necessarily keep up with the news, and so they were not active in informing themselves, so they were just going off their perceptions. And a lot of people that I interviewed were not politically active, so once again, they're purely going off of their outside influences. So now moving on to my discussion. So basically everybody does believe that there is some media bias, and this is largely grounded around like the 2016 election, that it's just kind of grown from there. It was present obviously beforehand, but that was kind of a real turning point. And media sites tailor their stories to a target audience. And this is not, and it's not new, but this is the first time we've kind of seen this as a weapon, and it's been used as a weapon to garner support and used to attack other sources of media. And so this is largely seen through terms like fake news and things like that. And most people believe that bias favors the opposing party, which is aligning with Gunther and his peers and what they studied in the article that I presented, and how no matter, and this was true regarding both conservatives and liberals, is that everybody kind of tends to think that the bias is in favor of the other, and that the other side's media perceive, or the other, is more biased than their own. And so people also then exhibited strong perceptions of bias in the media, even when they're not heavily involved, which means that there's obviously heavy influence of outside sources on their political socialization, and then this also means that their ideologies then take over before their critical thinking, their analysis of what the sources are actually saying. So the people who were not necessarily involved in their political process or in informing themselves, that purely went off of what they perceived to be their political ideologies, they thought then the other sources were more biased, and so they were more closed off to interpreting and receiving the information just because of their own political ideologies and perceptions. And so also a lot of respondents received information from unregulated sources such as like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, social media sites. And this is big, and it's easy to be swayed because the information is completely unregulated and there's no real check on the truth of the information being presented. So this could lead them to form maybe false opinions and false perceptions on bias in the media because it's not checked. And there is the even spread that I showed on the previous slides from both articles for that kind of how Newsmax and CNN had the similar spread in terms of the perceived accuracy of the information being presented. That can relate to the fact that most people in our society are more centrally aligned and are not on the extreme ends, and so they do believe that there is bias on both ends of on both sides of the media, and in general then, but conservatives had a higher perception of bias in the media than did liberals from my study, and this could be due to a number of factors. One, maybe that it is true. I didn't necessarily look into this, but it is true that there could be more bias in the liberal media. But also it could be because of the fact that fake media has been used more by conservative media outlets as a term to attack other sources of news, and it's been used by pretty prominent political figures as an attack. And this has caused many conservatives to kind of take it to heart and be swayed by that and to think that the liberal media is biased. And like Owen and Way's study found that people with conservative ideologies tend to seek out news outlets that align with their beliefs more than other areas of the political spectrum, which could serve to be that there may possibly be more confirmation bias within conservative groups. And then some limitations from my study include that a lot of the respondents were not politically active and they did not keep up with the news because I didn't struggle with the amount of responses or the number of responses I received. Most of my responses were from students here at Brophy, so they weren't necessarily super politically involved, and they were mostly just going off of their political ideologies, most likely their parents or any other social influences that have helped inform them in their political socialization. And there were a few more conservatives than liberals that responded, or there were more people identified as conservative than liberal when responding to my survey. So that could also explain maybe some of this view of why conservatives responded with a higher perception of bias than liberals. So, thank you.